We are live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. And today we are actually talking about repair. And repair is something that came up in recent articles that I've seen because there's sort of right to repair laws that are coming in some locations, to my knowledge. So, yes, that was my entry into this. What is right to repair? Well, basically, you guys have probably heard of planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of products, at least that we use in the United States, that are much more difficult or more expensive to repair than they are to replace. And so what you end up is with tons and tons of waste. And I believe the right to repair laws are having to do with the fact that people need to be able to have repair be an option.
Well, so there are people who have attempted to subvert the planned obsolescence and difficulty of repair by setting up small businesses where they gather these discardables and refurb and then resell. And there are companies that have said that's a violation of intellectual property and that have pursued entrepreneurs who have engaged in this. Most notably, recently there was the computer OS case. So really, it's really interesting because we're not always framing this as being about the hard collision between traditional folkways and technology and intellectual property laws.
Yeah.
And the ways that our intellectual property laws are acting in service of corporation rather than creative individuals these days.
Yeah.
And also about the ways that we are culturally forcing people into roles as obligate consumers rather than as people engaging in sort of a ad hoc change between being a producer or a consumer or an enjoyer or whatever other labels we can add. And this is about, must you only partake in society by consuming, which is really politically interesting right now when the word taker has become so loaded. But we're only now pushing back on the legal structures that make it impossible to do anything other than take and buy.
Yeah.
So the thing that my kids are going to be moving next week, so that's going to be fun, and we're going through collections of stuff. And one of the things that turned up in today's adventure is a perfectly good iPad. The charging port is broken. Therefore, it is a paperweight.
Yeah.
iPad store says this is a paperweight. Buy a new one. No, not going to buy. I am not going to buy a product from a company that says that designs something in that fashion.
Yeah.
Because those are particularly bad. But the other issues of repair are, why planned obsolescence is what designing something to not be repairable is. But reasonably, looking at things in world building is what is built by whom and what parts might be repairable and what parts can you reasonably say you can't repair this.
Yeah.
Nobody could repair this.
So Che is also adding that repairing will void your warranty. So the right to repair law also allows you to repair it without voiding the warranty.
So, first of all, it's really interesting with this warranty thing, because a warranty used to mean that a thing was rated to keep working
Uh-huh.
for a certain time, and limited term warranties were not the common thing necessarily. They've become increasingly more widespread, and it's common for things to have a very short term, 1 or 2 years. And then at that point, most of us that are partaking of producing this webcast remember going and replacing the vacuum tubes on TVs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have, the TV stopped working, throw it out. And so this is a revolutionary culture change a regressive culture change within the last 50 years. And it would be one thing if they honored their warranties in order to be solely responsible for the repair.
Mm-hmm.
But the warranty doesn't really protect the consumer at all at this point.
Yeah.
Because when you go in and say, oh, I have a problem with this device, it's not working, they will say, oh, well, you did anything from this list of predictable things that you might do to a thing in the course of using it.
Yeah.
It got a little wetter, it got a little hotter, it got a little colder. It didn't have an onboard surge protector. And why don't things have onboard surge protectors, right?
Right.
We don't mandate it. Why don't we mandate it? Well, because the cost is borne by the consumer, and we have a culture where costs are borne by the consumer. And so these laws are really interesting. But repairing we've turned it into a thing where it's become hipster and twee to get together in the makerspace, and we're going to have a repair day. And this was just what people did all winter long in temperate climates.
Yeah. Yeah.
You use it all summer and you fix it all winter.
I think, in fact, that we're having something going on right now that's very much like reinvention of the wheel. We have to reinvent all of the things now and give them new names for the digital age, and these include things like health insurance and taxes and all kinds of stuff. We have to somehow reinvent. And so what you have is a lot of repair stuff is now, it's this life hack that you need. Well, okay, but that there are older practices that are being kind of ignored or overwritten, or
look, you can tape this together and use this kind of glue, and it's very interesting seeing these life hacks, because many of them are based around, and go buy this product that will help you fix it.
Yeah.
How many of us own a soldering iron?
I currently do not own one, but that's because I arrived where I arrived with 3 suitcases, and I don't have all the things I want, including a toolbox.
But you would.
I would. I know how to use it. I've used it in the past.
Soldering iron, hammer.
I'm kind of in the extreme in this. I used to live on a sailboat, right? And I know how to weld, and I've welded on the boat at anchor while it was in the water, which is not a normal thing to do unless you're in a giant Navy boat. So
yeah, but I don't weld. But we own I'm pretty sure we own a soldering iron. We have.
The question is, what can you use it on these days?
Yeah,
that is the question.
I mean, so we have a thing where most of the things that were around when I grew up were fastened together with screws, and we can talk about how standardized screws were a huge revolution, which is really cool. But things were screwed together with tiny little screws, and they could always be unscrewed. And then came all of these proprietary screws. Hold on just a moment, please.
Yeah.
Proprietary screws, and then the assemble it without tools furniture, which is great, except that you can't unassemble it to move it.
Right. So that's one, but the mostly because it's not sturdy enough. I mean, most of us. I mean, I have a whole bunch of vintage and antique furniture that was assembled, not intending to be unassembled, but
yeah.
So screws, but now we went to all these little Torx screws and these varied screws that meant that you had to have the right tool in order to disassemble it. But now we've
Uh-huh.
gone one step further and things are sonically welded. And what that means is that the plastic casing of a thing is melted together so it can't be opened up without breaking it.
Yeah.
And often these things are done so that they're very delicately assembled and a final component snaps together. So if you open it, it's designed not only to be hard to open, but to actually break further if you open it up. It's really fascinating. I have, because of where I'm living, I have the opportunity to acquire older and older technology. I live in a building that was originally not electrified and was put together for what was a then relatively new technology of gas lighting and gas heating. So I have no fireplace. But there are lots of things that people around me are discarding because they're not sufficiently technological and they're not part of the Internet of Things. And so now I end up acquiring vintage teapots and old school electronica, which sometimes is challenging because it doesn't have safeguards and other things. And I do not necessarily acquire everything of that sort for myself because I tend to evaluate it. But yeah, we just assume things should be thrown away. And meanwhile, we don't teach people how to throw things away, which is
Yeah.
where that hoarding comes from. If you don't know how to throw it away, sometimes it's hard to throw it away.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to turn a piece of fabric into trash.
Yeah.
You know it's not trash. You've just outgrown it, or the button's broken, or the zipper's out. And replacing zippers is hard. But at this point, because of the way our clothing is priced, replacing a zipper costs hugely more than just getting a new item of clothing. And yet, what's really popular, as I see around me, is that there are these videos for decoratively repairing your clothes. Right? Oh, you have a hole. Well, if you're very, very good at embroidery, you can do this really elaborate, cute, put a flower over it. Most of us are not at that level. And so we run around either having clothes with holes or just letting them go or having them in the back of the closet to molder because, oh, look, there's another $5 sweater. The topic for the week is repair, but I kind of want to talk about how knowing how we're going to dispose of a thing when we acquire it is possibly an important thing that we don't maintain culturally anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other half of the repair.
Yeah.
And but this is also part of the whole culture of some of us are in communities where there's more of the passing things along culture happening.
Yeah.
It requires a community.
It does. It does. Um, and also, we're losing out. I find it fascinating that we have a political divide and who knows how to repair and who doesn't. And it's creating a cultural divide. Um, a lot of my friends who were told that there should be, we've essentially created a caste system in the US, to put it very loosely. And I apologize to my friends who are actually dealing with the effects of caste systems elsewhere that are much more enforced and stringent. But it's quite normal for somebody who is politically left to have no idea how to effectively use a hammer or a screwdriver because we were told, oh, take university prep courses, don't take home ec and shop courses, that there was a giant tendency to separate those out by class and to create a university academic aspiring class that doesn't know how to do anything practical and finds it quite normal not to know how to do anything practical. I have been treated as odd because I know how to do certain things and the genderedness of what you know how to do and don't do.
Oh, well, that's for sure.
So, but,
That is-
repair. I know how to repair a recipe that's gone wrong, right? Oh, that tastes too salty. Oh, that's too sweet.
Yeah.
Oh, that needs a little something else to flavor it. It's the same mindset, but we
knowing
very
how
much separate it, knowing how it's constructed.
Yeah, whether it's clothing or food or furniture or a vehicle or a person or an animal, really.
Well,
Because
yeah.
you can't. Well, that's slightly different. The construction versus how the parts work.
Well, I find it interesting that what we are expected to know how to do in terms of first aid and what we are not.
Mm-hmm.
Living on a sailboat meant that the time between injury and getting to certified medical care was
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
necessarily longer and more difficult. And so, having taken on the idea that we were going to live on a sailboat, we had to take on a different mindset than we would if we were on land. And I say this while acknowledging that people who've lived in farms and other places have the same time gap and possibly the same attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to make this so specific, but
Yeah.
I'm delighted. A friend has bought me a med kit that was designed by. Hold on, just a minute.
So you need to know more about how to do medical care, basically, if you're not going to be having anybody outside who's able to do it, which makes sense. You need to do it yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry. So what I was saying is that I have a med kit that was designed by former U.S. Army medics and other field combat people, and so I have equipment that I do not foresee myself using, and mostly have around, hoping that somebody with that sort of training happens to be around when I need it.
Yeah.
But we're not expected to do an awful lot for ourselves. We are expected to run to get it handled, and I would appreciate that so much more if we had better medical care accessible to everybody as a culture.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if we do certain things, we're looked on very weirdly. I was just talking to friends about the fact that having decided to home birth and admitting it leads to my being treated by a certain class of pediatrician with a deep, deep level of suspicion, because that is an activity that's supposed to be done according to certain rites and traditions. And I don't want to get into the reasons why people ought to go into supervised or not supervised. This is a complicated talk that's not for this hour. But I think that the whole idea of repair as a cultural rite and ritual, and that those expectations are about cultural rites and rituals, is an interesting hook to build into the world building.
Yeah. Well, so in a lot of depending on what the setting, obviously, of fantasy or science fiction world is, you can have different kinds of repair structures sort of built into the world. Tinkers and those kinds of traveling traveling pot repair guys are definitely a thing, though I don't see them in fiction all that often. I have seen them before, though. So
Okay, but
travel around and offer your skills. And
in science fiction, we really, really, really love our engineers.
Yes.
Our beloved characters include Scotty and Kylie, and
yes,
we really do love this fix it, right? And we love the inventor characters. And we don't have as much love for the repair, but a lot of the fairy tale structure is about somebody coming in to repair a brooch in the world. So I think that I wonder if the thing we are actually talking about in this hour is actually about tropes of disposability.
Interesting.
As opposed to tropes of repair. Because we don't tell stories about oh, I lost my sonic screwdriver, I'll go buy another one. And we don't, I mean, we have a moment of I think lightsaber repair in one of the Star Wars movies, but overall we don't talk about the lightsaber creation, right? Where do they come from, and what we don't focus on that nearly as much. And it's sort of a fantasy science fiction epic divide where you do get to see the forging of the swords and the rings and we like this story, but how did Han get his blaster? Who is the blaster maker? Is it just a robot assembly line?
Yeah.
Is it a government contract? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know if it's a spoiler at this point or not. First or second episode of Jodie Whittaker's Doctor.
Yeah,
I think first. Her sonic screwdriver. There's actually a fairly long scene about her constructing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. But it's not the same as the forging of the sword, because you can look at the forging of the sword and people who actually know something about blacksmithing can look and say, yes, that's right, or oh my God, why are they doing that?
Yeah, it's hard to evaluate the construction of a thing.
There's actually steps in technology that somebody can look at.
I mean, part of it is because in science fiction, at what point do you start with the creation story of that particular device, right? Is there a Stefnel Radio Shack in your story? And now we have a problem because we don't actually have modern contemporary Radio Shacks anymore in that way. Where you can go and buy a bunch of diodes and string them together.
Well, if you look at Star Trek, the whole premise of the replicator is very much about disposability and then just atom by atom reconstruction of things, right? It takes away a lot of the struggles of repair and all that kind of stuff.
I found Stevenson's world building around his sort of nano construction and disposability to be really interesting, because he made that a central part of, for instance, the Diamond Age, because he's actually talking about it. Where do things go? What happens when they degrade? Where are we getting the materials for creating things? And I think these discussions of waste stream and creation and repair are really important, but they don't get told because we're too busy blowing things up and exploring strange new worlds. Does dilithium crystal transport have a waste product? I mean, I think they have to be renewed and replaced sometimes, but
it was taken up in an episode at one point.
But they're taken up as like a once in a while thing, right?
Oh yeah, but I mean, at least it's not addressed at all.
Okay, but it's not like the replicator comes and goes. It's like the communicator comes and goes. Those things are really all the time, and we know what the use parameters are around them, right? And we don't see how do dishes get washed on the Enterprise or not washed. I find this really fascinating, and so of course I am, because these are the things I'm obsessed with, possibly because I live in a life full of laundry and dishes. I do worry about what happens, and I write this into my stories. And I'm kind of currently led to a moment of going, this is what happens when you have stories written by people whose cups of tea appeared mysteriously and who didn't have to deal with the, oh no, I've run out of tea, or I have a mound of expired tea leaves, or I need to wash my teacup. If this is being done for you, then you don't think about it, which is, I was just reading an article where somebody was saying, what was it? The premise was email is making professors stupid, because he was saying that, I'm pretty sure it was he, was saying that it was taking away from these vast tracts of unstructured time that people had to really think.
What?
I just looked at that and I thought, wow, that's, in this current culture we live in, so gendered.
My mother is just laughing hysterically. I can, if
Right?
I were to say, yes, vast tracts of unstructured, yeah, she would just laugh hysterically.
But I mean, that's the ideal of having a wife who takes care of it, so that your clothes are ironed and they're washed, and you just show up, you walk to your closet, and you get dressed, you go to the office, and the magical cups of tea come and the ashtrays are dumped out for you. Is this mythical lifetime, right? And I think that the kinds of stories that get written by people for whom that's true are very different than the stories that get written by the people who feel capable of talking about the ways that that's not true.
Yeah.
So, I will never write a story where I don't know where a cup of tea comes from. I can write a story where tea leaves come from the grocery store. I mean, I know that there's a whole process between the tea plant and the teacup.
Yeah.
My cup of tea comes to my desk because I put it there. You're talking about people who don't even do that.
No,
but there are steps in there.
Their cups of tea appear magically because they said, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have a cup of tea?
Oh, Stargate Atlantis.
Well, the thing is, I think for those of us who are the tea bringers,
mm-hmm.
I see the point of having a story that's about the fantasy of that. But I find the fantasizing about that really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's interesting. For the fantasy of the tea bringer, who may or may not have other jobs, the fantasy might be, I wish that when so-and-so asked, wanted a cup of tea, it would just magically appear so I can get on with my life and do something else. Not interrupted.
That was a thing I really loved about Anne McCaffrey's Pern stories when she was focusing on Manali. Because, or is it Menally? I can't remember right now. But anyway, she talks about the menial tasks and who's expected to do them, and the structure of apprentice and journeyman and master, and how that works and who does the labor. I was talking to grad students recently, and that really is one of the few places from the sort of left academic side that we still see that. Also in interns at companies. But I'm also thinking about the fact that maybe it's just what I'm reading. I feel like we have the repair people on these starships, but I can't think of a story of a science fiction clockmaker kind of character, somebody whose job is to fix things.
Well, yeah, that's kind of interesting because clockmakers are feature rather prominently in fantasy stories, I think.
I think that we have this idea that fantasy is non-technological, but there's a whole bunch of technology involved in all the fantasy, whether it's the swords, the cauldrons. Who made that cauldron and how?
Yeah.
Was that purchased? Was that just witchcraft? How did that cauldron come to be? Because making a cauldron is a pretty intensive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lot of work right there.
In fantasy, anytime you have a woodworker or a glass blower
or blacksmiths
or blacksmiths and anybody who makes something or designs something, I think people who think technology doesn't appear in fantasy tend to forget that fire is technology, that fire as
How many of us have actually tried to make fire out of no matches?
I was never a scout, so I never tried to do that.
I've never done it, but I've seen it done.
It is a lot of work.
I think my husband's done it and would prefer to have a lighter, thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, even just the flint and steel is such a difference. And that horror of knowing you're going to be cold and that you're getting more and more tired as you're trying and trying.
And your fingers are getting numb.
We talk about this in modern culture by talking about what it means to try to feed yourself when you're really low on spoons or exhausted or something else.
Mm-hmm.
But it used to not be such a fringe thing.
Yeah.
But also, I'm looking at the fact that there's a point in humanity where you have very, very repairable things, and then some things become less repairable unless you have an expert, and some things are just not repairable by that technology of that era, like ceramics.
Mm-hmm.
Ceramics are not repairable, except that there are people who use, varnish and lacquer to repair ceramics, for instance. But we could end up with a culture where ceramics are very repairable.
Mm-hmm.
Nanotechnology does all sorts of interesting things. I haven't yet seen somebody who has repairable ceramics. I suddenly want to write a story about what happens if you're a future. I say this a lot, and some of these actually do turn into story snippets, and many of them don't. I want to see a story about a future archaeologist who's wrestling with, should you reassemble things or should you leave them broken? Because their technology will allow them to reconstruct a thing.
Take the pot shard, the pieces of a old pot, put them together.
And now,
not just glue them together, but also
our repairs are visible and documentable and very clear, right? But I'm imagining that if you have nanotech, what does that do to carbon dating things? What does that do to figuring things out? What do you do if you have an AI that can turn a whole midden full of pot shards into reconstructed pieces? Does it matter? I think it does. I want to know how.
Yeah.
I want to deal with that ethical dilemma.
Well, I'm going towards the don't speak Latin in front of the books thing. Did you really want to put that pot together? Was it broken for a reason? And if you put it back together again, what will happen?
Well, demons.
Yeah. Though that's usually more of a breaking. Do you really want to open that box, or what happens if you drop that urn? But there are stories of things that are broken into pieces and buried, in miles or countries or planets apart to keep them from coming back together again. And now,
yeah.
Oh, now we have Horcruxes versus dismembered and buried at the crossroads as sort of an opposition. Broken apart for preservation purposes versus broken apart for annihilation purposes.
Right.
Also, what do you do if you have deliberately broken a thing so that it shouldn't be repaired, and now you have a repair by reflex culture? I don't know. I'm also thinking about what it means to make something in a culture that's very high reuse and repair.
Yeah.
Innovation becomes very transgressive. But we have all the glasses. You can't just have a new one because you broke the hinge.
Yeah.
You've been sentenced to your particular niches. I repair. I mean, we're not going to talk about the fact that maybe in this future you can have whatever to correct your vision, but you can't have a new pair of glasses because you've already been assigned the glasses for your category of being. I mean, there's some interesting fallout that you could play with there. Or maybe it's just me being tired and loopy.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind for me as we're talking about this is how when you look at the difference between the way that people who are people of liberal means, not liberal politics, but sort of people of leisure, with the ability to replace things, and how they would deal with the things that they buy versus people who are not people of means, right? And so how does poverty intersect with this question, I guess, is my thought. Because at the same time that it would be valuable to be able to repair things and keep them and not have to replace them, it's also more difficult to access and afford things that are going to be repairable and as opposed to replaceable.
And the tools and supplies for repairing.
Yeah.
So mythologically, and just by fable, we have the example of throwing things away after a use or break is a quick trope for how privileged somebody was, right? We talk about kings and dukes and various having just tossed out the precious gold plates into the ocean. And so, yeah, poverty encourages repair, but as we just said, if you don't have the tools, it's very hard to repair things.
Yeah.
And
skills, because education is also, at this point,
so there's right now what we have is a combination of stigma and skill and opportunity. But I'm also noting that we're having this conversation at all in the context of having othered and alienated the idea of repair. Because people who live on farms are still dealing with, there's a great tool out there that takes stainless wire and turns it into an ad hoc hose clamp. Because we think of hose clamps as things that have to be bought at the plumbing store. But you can actually, by application of twisting and bending and just working with basic materials pressures, create a really viable hose clamp. The only thing about it is it can't be unscrewed and rescrewed. So it is a make once and toss, but it is a make ad hoc. So it gets sold to people on farms and also people on boats, which is how I know about this. But I find it interesting because I see a political divide that just baffles me, straddling it, because there's a whole community of people who have not forgotten about this as a style. And because there's such a theme of aligning technology with cultural progressiveness, it leads to an attitude that cultural progressiveness means waste and artificially performative recycling concepts without having the culture of actually being able to recycle and repair. And I also find myself, as a consequence, going further and further back into older technology. I dislike the whole cycle of throwing out Teflon coated pans so much that all of my cookware is either stainless or ceramic or cast iron. And so this is also why I end up writing stories set in the future about people who are into antique technology.
Sure.
But
I mean, I think that we it's very easy for us to lose sight of how many old technologies we are currently using in our daily lives right now. We think of our lives. We can often think of our lives as full of the latest technology, but sprinkled in among all of the other things that we are that we are using are some very, very old technologies that, that we still use, like forks and rulers and.
But forks are an interesting thing because of when forks actually end up in our culture. Forks don't end up in Western Europe until, what year is it? 13 something?
Sure.
Forks are relatively new. The technology it takes to make a knife is older than we give it credit for. And I'm also looking at the fact that I'm wearing clothes that have buttons on them, and buttons are old.
Yep.
Make a hole in something and then stick something else in it to keep it closed together is a fascinating thing to be as old as it is.
Yeah.
Also, tie it together. And nothing is tied in science fiction plots because it's all buckles and snaps and zippers and seals, which is, as a child, why I really love Star Wars, because you could actually see things that were knotted. Because it seemed like everywhere else strings had gone out of fashion. And it seemed really odd to me.
Yeah. I had the very first story I ever had published had an artifact in it that had been repaired. And I remember people pointing it out to me as something that was unusual. And I was like, really, was that unusual? But of course, now from where I'm sitting right now, I'm like, wow, yeah, I guess that was unusual. What I was trying to do with it at the time was just to sort of say, hey, look, this is it was supposed to be revelatory of a certain type of cultural practice of the people who had made it, right? That this was an heirloom object that was handed down, that was repaired as necessary, that that you would be responsible for maintaining as well as for using.
We also, when we're doing science fiction, we often forget that the future is not evenly distributed.
Yes.
And we forget that people maintain old technologies even as they keep on new ones. We in our stories often spread the idea that it's utterly normal to have thrown out everything and have no artifacts, and we have only newness. To the point where when our ship's captains are collectors of something old, we sort of look at it as a very unusual, psychologically revealing thing that they've done. I'm like, there are cultures where it is considered appropriate to destroy everything a person used in their life upon their demise. And then there are cultures where preserving that stuff is really important. And so we might be right back to funerary practices as well when we're talking about repair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I want to write a future full of post-humanist, transhuman beings who are like, oh no, you broke, now you're disposable. We don't fix you.
Well,
This is terribly dystopian of me, but
dystopian cat. That's okay though.
I don't know that I'm normally in this dystopian mode. I was on the plane and I was watching James Cameron's Story of Science Fiction multi-part documentary series. It was really fascinating because I'm sitting there watching how I've forgotten that people are considered iconic by other people because they've become, oh yeah, so and so who comes over to my house for tea. Talking about various tropes
that
in science
appears
fiction.
out of nowhere, right, Kat?
Tea that appears out of nowhere. I have not managed to get my own hostessing to that level. And in fact, I engage in very messy processes of boiling water and not. I mean, it's funny to me, the electric wall plug hot pot, the vacuum pot is a very old technology. It's older than I am, but it simultaneously feels very newfangled and very old at the same time. And I am on team, I will burn fossil fuels and and make hot water. And I use the microwave at times, but people get very disturbed about the microwave, which again, it's old technology now. But we act like it's still new and scary. And if you boil the water for the tea in the microwave, oh no, you're just...
Well, but that borders on superstition or a sort of an additional narrative that has sort of adhered to the existence of microwave.
But
I just use the electric kettle because it's more convenient, actually. And I'm heating the water without heating the cup that don't want to burn my hands on it. Yeah.
Well, I'm not heating the cup. I have a dedicated 2-cup Pyrex measuring cup that is mostly used for boiling water in the microwave. So this is my techno tea kettle.
I have an electric.
And I don't use my electric kettle because I don't like the fact that when I'm in places that have water that leaves residue, it's very hard to clean the kettle.
This is what vinegar is for.
It is. It helps if one doesn't have vinegar avoidant people living with one.
Yeah. Yep. That would make a difference.
I'm thinking an awful lot about being on a long-term shipboard environment and what chemicals do you use to clean? What energy do you use to clean? What systems do you have in place so things are auto-cleaning? As I gaze and envy it, I'm thinking a lot about bathroom renovation, speaking of repair. And I have friends who have floor drains by standard in their local cultures. And we in North America do not make floor drains a normal thing. And we don't make the bidet hose by the toilet a normal thing. And we have other things that are not normalized in our showers. And I'm looking at all of these with extreme longing because they're current technology or even antique technology in other places. But here, I would have to do so much work. And I don't think that I can afford to or even actually practically make happen these things like, floor drains. Floor drains would mean my children and I would fight so much less. It would mean that my downstairs neighbor, I would never worry that something was going to happen. There would be an overflowing sink and a downstairs neighbor trying to have problems, with the ceiling bulging out. And we don't solve this problem on a systemic level. And I want my bathtub enclosure to not be a mold trap and all these things. And I'm very, very cranky about the way that capitalism keeps me from having all the technology that I want to consume applied. And speaking of, and where is my spontaneously appearing cup of tea of bathroom repair? Watch me spin all these things together.
Plumbers.
Sounds excellent. Well, you guys, we've just hit 5:00 and it's a little after now. So we're gonna wrap up. Next week, Vida Cruz is coming on the show. I still have to confirm with her, but I'm really looking forward to talking with her about her work. Yeah. So be there or be square, as they say, or they used to say. And I will stop the broadcast. Thanks, you guys.